Iran still denying that it was involved in a drone attack which killed 3 US troops and injured 34 others on a US base in Jordan, just near the Syrian border. American troops were still in their sleeping quarters when the drone hit. Little or no warning, according to CBS News. Joe Biden has said the attack had been carried out by Iran-backed militia groups. And he said, we will respond. America will respond. Let's talk about the implications of this with Jasmine El Gamal, political analyst and former Middle East advisor at the Pentagon. Jasmine El Gamal, good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Have you, in terms of America's response and indeed Iran's denials, is this as per what you would expect after an event like this?
Well, I would have to start by saying, regardless of the politics or policy, this was a really tragic loss of life of these American soldiers. And it's really difficult to watch all these lives being lost in the last few months in this conflict. Secondly, when it comes to the U.S. response, a retaliation, the U.S. has to retaliate. There's no question. This is obviously an escalation. This is something that is extremely serious, and the president will have to respond in a very deliberate, very, very forceful and very speedy way. He's not going to be able to take his time responding to this. So you just had John Kirby saying, the NSC, National Security Council spokesperson, saying that the U.S. will respond at a time and in a way of its choosing. So they're trying to maintain some control there, and that they're going to do basically everything they can to protect U.S. troops and U.S. interests in the region.
And it's the first time U.S. soldiers have been killed by strikes in the region since October the 7th. Can you just explain to people what the significance of that U.S. presence in Jordan is?
Right. Well, the U.S. has a memorandum of understanding, a strategic partnership with Jordan that basically allows the U.S. military to operate from within Jordan to protect and maintain U.S. interests in the region. And then also, for example, as with the case in during the Syria conflict, when the war in Syria was at its height and there was potential danger to Jordan and spillover of that war into Jordan, that the U.S. was there to provide protection for Jordan as well. So it's not something new. As you know, the Jordan and the U.S. Are extremely close allies in the region. And so this is, it's not something that can be described as, occupying forces, the U.S. being in an occupying forces sort of position in the region. This is at the invitation of the Jordanian government.
Yeah, and the whole question of whether this already dreadful conflict is going to go pop, and become much, much worse. If you would take the temperature on that for me. Because there's the Houthi rebels in the Red Sea, and we're told, no, that's unconnected, and it doesn't feel entirely unconnected. And then you have events like this, and you have the north of Israel and Hezbollah, and the nervous times doesn't really cover it, does it?
Absolutely. And I think, you hit the nail on the head, really, when you talk about the connectedness of all of this. Now, when you look at the level of escalation and the sort of, you named a number of hotspots right now across the region. You have the Lebanon-Israeli border, you have the Houthis and commercial shipping in the Red Sea. You have these attacks against U.S. interests in Syria and Iraq. And now in Jordan on the border as well of those three countries. And you can see all of these hot spots popping up. And when you ask about whether or not they're connected, it really all comes back to the conflict in Gaza, the war in Gaza, and what role it has to play in this escalation that we've seen since October 7th. Now, there have been over 150 attacks on U.S. interests since October 7th in the region. This is the first of them that results in U.S. casualties. So you can see the situation sort of getting more and more escalatory. But at the end of the day, as you said exactly, you have to talk about how this is connected and what the root cause is, and whether the U.S. is finally going to start admitting, or at least looking at the possibility that this is in fact all connected to the war in Gaza and U.S. support for Israel.
And
Israeli
And
in
in a
Gaza.
sense, presumably that whole Iran-America axis as well. Um,
That's right.
if it hadn't been what the events in Gaza and Israel on October the 7th and since October the 7th, at some point it would have been something else that made them take their positions, and leave us in these kind of nervous moments.
Yeah, that's a trickier question and a trickier topic. So of course the US and Iran have had this really complicated history. And even when the Obama administration was negotiating with Iran on the nuclear issue and came up with this deal, there was still a lot of criticism against the Obama administration for doing that without addressing this what we call malign Iranian influence in
Yeah,
the
more
region.
hawkish American politicians thought it was naive of him, didn't they?
That's right,
Yeah.
exactly. And so certainly the tensions between the two countries are not new, but I would call to attention the fact that, as I said, the escalatory nature of these attacks by the so-called axis of resistance. So we're talking about Hezbollah, Hamas, the Houthis, and Iranian-backed militias in Iraq and
Mm.
Syria. The amount and sort of intensity that has escalated since October 7th does tell us something about the role that the war in Gaza has to play. And then I want to make another point that I think is also fairly important for listeners is that even though it is not in doubt the fact that Iran actually funds these militias and these groups and provides arms and support and training and all of that, actually the degree to which Iran directs these groups to attack, to say, okay, you go do this, you go kill these soldiers now. That is very much in question. It's not quite as transparent.
Oh, that's
And in
interesting. So they're not just groups that give Iran plausible deniability. They have this sounds a little like Russia and the Wagner Group. Would that be a good sort of
I,
comparator?
I suppose because it's sort of this line between, what is Iran using these groups for, and then what are the groups using their own capabilities for, right? So, like, for example, if we look at the Houthis may be saying that everything that they're doing is about Gaza, and there may be an element of truth to that. And everything that they're using for their attacks is Iranian provided. But the Houthis also know that this is bolstering their own credibility inside of Yemen, where they've been quite unpopular for the last several years
Mm.
because of their bad governance and horrific tactics inside domestically and all of this other stuff. So there definitely there's an element of independence to these groups, and there's
Right.
an element of connection where Iran uses them as a way to poke the US, to keep it on its toes, if you will, so that if and when the US and Iran ever sit down for negotiations again, Iran has these groups as leverage to use in these
But
negotiations.
can I
So
ask you the degree to
yeah.
which the independence of such groups, and you might include in such groups, no, they're not necessarily working together, but on October the 7th, we know it was largely a Hamas-led operation. We also know that smaller groups, local criminals, opportunists went in as well.
Mhm.
To what degree could these independent militia actually tip the balance and really cause a conflagration?
That is such an important question because what I've been saying for the last 3 months is the thing that actually worries me the most is a miscalculation, not a deliberate attack that is meant to just blow up the region in an all-out war,
Mm.
but a miscalculation.
That does it anyway. Yeah.
That does it anyway, and that the actors, all of whom have been saying so far that they don't want an all-out war, that actually leads them to that very result, and just puts so many people in danger and
Yeah.
really impacts the U.S. strategic interests, but also people living in the region as well.
Yeah. Well, let's hope that does not happen. But thank you. Such an interesting conversation. Thank you, Jasmine.